It feels like winter is never going to end this year. As I begin filming this video, we're getting into late March, and what you see here is a good old-fashioned Canadian spring. Of course, there are signs of spring. The tulips and daffodils that I planted last year are starting to shoot up, but still, nature isn't giving any cues to say it's ready to plant, which is what phenology is all about.
If we haven't met yet, I'm Sylvia, and I like sharing old-fashioned tips, skills, and recipes here on Vintage Kitchen Vixen. And phenology just happens to be an old-fashioned way to know when to plant your vegetables and your flowers, and to know when the hungry insects are going to flood your garden. Now, in filming this video, I drew heavily from the old Farmer's Almanac. I don't know if you're familiar with this book, but it's been around for a very long time. It says on the first page, this is the 231st edition of the Old Farmer's Almanac. Isn't that insane? They come up with a new one every year and containing. So this one is fitted for my own region, but it contains, besides the large number of astronomical calculations and the farmer's calendar for every month of the year, it contains a variety of new, useful, and entertaining matter. And it's true. There's just so much interesting information in this book. So I will link this treasure trove of information below. And without any further ado, let us get into some phenology.
I have two lonely crocuses growing in my front flower bed. They came with the house, and every spring they greet me in their orange glory. When the crocus blooms, it signals that the earth is ready to receive radish, spinach, and parsnip seeds. In that early spring climate, the forsythia explodes in cheery yellow blooms, meaning peas, onion sets, and lettuce can be planted. If you're planting potatoes in your garden this year, watch out for the first blooming dandelion, because that's your cue to get your spuds in the ground. When the rest of the dandelions turn the grass into a sunny blanket of yellow, or when the daffodils burst into bloom, carrots, beets, lettuce, spinach, Swiss chard, and cole crops like broccoli and Brussels sprouts can be planted. Corn is best planted when the apple blossoms are over and done with, or when the oak leaves are the size of a squirrel's ear. For best results, take advantage of companion planting and sow beans and squash for a mighty Three Sisters combo. By now the weather is gloriously warm, and the lilacs are in full bloom. Is there anything better than their tantalizing scent? Lilac is my favorite, and when it blooms, it's time to plant beans, cucumber, and squash seeds. Another heady springtime bloom is lily of the valley, and when those little white bells are spreading their joy, it's finally time to get your tomatoes in the ground. If you have peppers and eggplants to transplant, bearded irises will be your cue. And if you're lucky enough to live in a land where peonies grow, their stunning blooms mean it's safe to plant melons. If you're more of a flower gardener, plant your perennials when the maple trees start getting leaves. The annuals are best planted when the lilac is in bloom, which is also around the time when grasshopper eggs hatch. Chicory, that wonderful, wonderful plant, signals the arrival of the dreaded squash vine borer when it begins to bloom.
All right, so if my squash vine borer horror music made you laugh, I hope you will like this video, or if you found any of this information that I just presented to you either useful or interesting, please like this video because it will help me get this video out to more like-minded gardeners. Now, as I was saying, phenology is an old-fashioned way to know when you're going to be planting your garden, your vegetables, your flowers, and to know when to expect pests. Phenology itself is a science of noticing two different phenomena, natural phenomena occurring, whether that is climate-related or pertaining to the flora or fauna around you. And that method of gardening by nature's cues has really fallen out of favor over the years, not only because we mostly abandoned gardening, like the kitchen garden doesn't exist the way it used to. It doesn't have the same importance because many of us rely on grocery stores for supplying our kitchens with produce. We've also kind of stepped away from nature and relied more on things that are man-manufactured, like like our calendar. In previous years, I have always relied on the calendar when planting my garden. Where I am in Quebec, the common sense is to not plant your garden until after May 2-4 weekend, which we call Victoria weekend, which Americans know as Memorial Day weekend, and I don't know if there is any other special date for that anywhere else in the world. But that's when you're supposed to hold off until that weekend to start planting your garden. And if you're planting more delicate plants like tomatoes and peppers, you're supposed to hold off until the first weekend of June when it's warm enough and all risk of frost is behind you. Now, last year, spring started in March and everything was a month early. Normally, it doesn't get warm in here until April. And even in April, there's risks of frost. So you don't want to plant anything. And it's usually a safe bet to wait until after May 2-4 weekend, because I remember one of my very first years of gardening, I got so excited by the beautiful weather that I planted things early and frost killed many of my plants, like my geranium seedlings that I had propagated. So I learned the hard way that you wait until the weather is ready to receive your plants. And if I had known to look for nature's cues, that would have made a big difference. But it's just something that I've learned in my gardening journey. And it's something I recently learned. I learned about it last year when I picked up my very first copy of the Old Farmer's Almanac. And I thought I was tickled by the idea of it. And I didn't think much about it until recently. I don't know, it popped into my brain again. Or I think I received an email from them about phenology. And I'm like, you know what? More people need to learn about this because it's a fascinating topic. Definitely not fail-proof, but it's a different way to plant. It's a different way to look at things. It's a way to fall into a rhythm with nature and to become more aware of what's going on with nature around us. Like when the crocus blooms this year, I am going to be planting my radishes and my lettuce. It's all going in the ground as soon as that crocus blooms. But last year, if I had known about phenology at the beginning of the growing season, I think I would have gone about it differently because the lilac bloomed in May. Normally, the lilac blooms in June, but last year, the lilac and the lily of the valley, they bloomed in May. And that does not happen here, at least not very often. So I think that would have come in handy because if I had been practicing phenology, if I would have been practicing that way of planting, I would have felt comfortable with starting my garden early. And if I would have done that, I would have had an extra month of a growing season. But yeah, like I learned a lesson last year. I learned why it's important to step away from the calendar every so often and that there is a different way to do it. Since I started gardening, since I started foraging, since I started really getting into herbalism, I've become more in tune with nature. And I think this is going to help further that connection even more. I mean, a lot of people, they're kind of separate from nature. Like how many people look up at the stars at night anymore, let alone notice when things start blooming around them? Like some people go to bed and they wake up one morning and there are leaves on the trees. It just seems to happen overnight. And it is true, like I get it. But for me, I take the time to notice that progression as it's happening. And it does, one morning you wake up and it does seem like the trees got their leaves overnight, but it's a process and you just need to be aware of it. Because if you don't notice when an oak leaf is the size of a squirrel's ear, you're going to miss that cue to plant your corn. Anyhow, for more of my gardening videos, I do have a playlist. Now, on that note, my garden playlist is very much victory garden focused because if you garden today, I consider you a victory gardener. Otherwise, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching my video. I will see you in the next one. Bye.
So can a clam feel happiness?
Well, normally you say happy as a clam, right?
That's a saying, yeah.
It is a saying. So that's a saying. That's in question.
Yeah. And I'm questioning a clam's ability to feel things like happiness.
Probably more
on a robot.
Yeah.
Who are you to determine whether or not a clam is sentient?
I'm asking. Who are you to say they are?
A clam enthusiast.
Clam enthusiast. This is a bungo. Anyway.